Today we are up to Masechta Yevamos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. It is Monday, Yud Nissan's Daf. So the last thing we learned was that Shmuel came along and said about this case that we learned in the Mishnah, an extraordinary case where two brothers were engaged to two sisters, and then they swapped when they came to the chuppah and inadvertently, in the number of Avedas that they did. And Shmuel came along and said that all of these women, before they can go back to their original husbands, you have to wait 3 months in order to have havchana, to determine if there is a child born, whose child is it? Is it a mamzer, not a mamzer, and so on. He says all instances, doesn't matter what. The only exceptions are a convert or a woman who was a slave who was released. Those two do not have to separate at all. But a young Jewish girl, even though she didn't have any children and she can't bear children yet, still needs to wait those 3 months because it's a gzeira. A gzeira because an adult would have to wait 3 months, so therefore we made it uniform across the board. And the Gemara says we're not talking about a girl who went ahead and was memayin, because by an adult that doesn't happen. It's impossible to happen, so there's no point in making a gzeira. But rather we're talking about a girl who received a get. So then we asked the question, Shmuel already said elsewhere, so we said that Shmuel is teaching us about a ketana who was mezana. That even though she was mezana, she wasn't married, we're going to make a gzeira that now you have to wait 3 months before she can go ahead and get married to make sure whose child it is. So according to this version, the only one that don't need havchana is a giyadis and a meshachredes ketana. Now there's another version to this, which is the Gemara right now. At least, even though in our Mishnah says clearly they can go straight back, our Mishnah is an exception because this is not an unusual case to have two brothers, two sisters in the whole story that they swapped. However, Lish Nachin is another version to what Shmuel said. They said, Shmuel said, Kulan, all of them, they all need to have havchana. They need to wait those 3 months. Here, in this version, he's saying that even an adult, giyadis and adult zechredes, we don't have to wait 3 months, and we're not going to make a gzeira. So this is a step above the first lashon. Avokatana bas Yisrael, but a young girl. We're talking about adults, we're not talking about children. But when it comes to young ones who can't bear children, even a Yiddish girl does not have to have havchana of 3 months. So no matter which case are you telling me that a ketana does not need havchana? B'mai. Even me, now we're talking about the case of me in which she walks out, she's underage and she walks out of the marriage. How much more chadazimni? You already said once that they don't need to have havchana, because there's no reason to have a gzeira. A gedola can't be in such a situation. If we're talking about she was taken divorce, when you do need havchana, how come much more the boy we do need havchana, because a geyser, if an adult in this situation receives a divorce, she needs to wait 3 months before she's going to be married. So the same thing, ketana also with geyser, how much more me and the boy ain't the chichil have to the me, you don't need to wait 3 months. No havchana, but because it can't happen by an adult. But no, some get if you gave a get to a youngster, you need to wait 3 months because of an adult. We're talking about a case of znus. And since it's not often that you have a young girl who is mezana, promiscuous, so therefore we're not going to make a gzeira, and you don't have to wait 3 months. Okay, so the more has a question. So I understand that, but you also say what Shmuel's chiddush here was that a giyadis who's an adult does not have to wait 3 months. Why aren't we worried at all that they should have to wait 3 months? We're not talking about a gzeira to Yiddish women. We're talking about they themselves. Since they are mezana while they were not Jewish, they were mezana, so they should have to wait 3 months. We have to determine the child was born after Geda, 48. Says Yimar, who don't make Rabbi Yossi? He follows if you were Rabbi Yossi, who was not goyze at all. And why is that? Because a woman can make sure that they don't fall pregnant. An adult is mature enough to make sure they don't fall pregnant. So when it comes to Yisraelis, we will be goyzer Yisraelis who's mezana, because by marriage, definitely you have to determine havchana. So a Jewish girl, even though she's mezana, an adult, we can make a gzeira because they're very similar. But a giyadis, he wasn't goyzer. Why? Since there's no such thing as marriage by a guy, there's no point in making a gzeira. It's only regarding he or she herself. And she said, "Well, take care of herself." because she herself was interested in making sure that the children, she knew that she's 3 months before that she's going to become a Yid. So therefore she's preparing herself. The time you learn Hagiyadis, Vahashavuya, Hagiyadis, and someone could never a shivcha and a maid should niftu, a servant. Should niftu the redemption's guy conversion are free. Tzichel Hamdin Gimel Chadoshi, read a beautiful hole in all these instances. You have to wait 3 months for Havchana to determine the child when it happened. Yesi Matila Oris Yesi says to get engaged and get married straight away. You can go ahead straight away. And my time to basic. What's the logic of basic? Why aren't we guys? First of all, they themselves doing mizana. We need to know the child when it was born, when she was conceived, because somebody holds isha mizana, a woman generally who is mizana mishameshet b'meich. She will have a tashmish using like a tampon today. She wants to make sure that she does not fall pregnant. So therefore, she's careful. There's no reason to come along and worry about the children from before, because there are no children before. But by Israelis, we're still going to be goyzer. By Bishleim, I understand Hagiyadis. Since she knew intended to be Yid, she takes extra precautions to make sure that she doesn't conceive while she's still a goy. Even the diet to the Giyudei, since she intends to make Mintra Nafsha, she's careful. Make sure that the children she's about to conceive will be born as a Jewess, not as a goy. Understood. But Shvuya, somebody was kidnapped who has no control over their lives, or a Shivcha who is a Shivcha who had Nami. So it was generally, we can also find, even though they don't really have control, but we can say maybe the Shami Mimarayu, they heard from their masters or the mistresses that eventually they're going to be redeemed, so they're careful. Mintin of Shayu. But sometimes a shifter goes out, their eye or tooth was knocked out. They just go free. That means they had no time to repair it, which means that while they were mazane, they didn't take any precautions. So why don't they have to wait 3 months? How can that be? And you say that in all instances. In the case we had no opportunity to prepare yourself, and suddenly you were set free, you do have to wait 3 months. Maybe can be, because now we learned Anusa, a woman was raped, and she definitely had no anticipation that that's going to happen, or a mafuto she seduced, which that could be. You have to wait 3 months. And Abiyasi said, even in this case, she can go ahead and get married straight away. There's no enough chana. Now, in the case of Arusa, she couldn't prepare beforehand, bring tampons. She had no idea that she was going to be raped. Isha, not because pre-event, post-event, they do everything in their powers to ensure that they don't fall pregnant. How? Isha mizana, a woman's mizana, mishapeche, she turns herself continuously over, to make sure that she does not fall pregnant. And so therefore, even the case where she's raped, afterwards she makes sure she does everything to make sure she doesn't fall pregnant. The same thing with Giyadis, they will do everything possible to make sure they don't go pregnant. So Giyadis and a Shivcha, according to this version of Shmuel, they do not have to wait 3 months, because they're going to make sure that they don't fall pregnant, because they know they're going to become eaten. They don't want to fall pregnant. And the idach, so what's Chacham then? How come they say no that an adult shivcha will be still a geyser? You need to wait 3 months. We are concerned that maybe she didn't do enough work to make sure that she ensured that she doesn't fall pregnant. Okay, in the Mishnah it says that if the girls were a kohenes, it says that if the girls themselves were a kohenes, so then, and this happened, this whole story of the two brothers and two sisters, they can no longer eat truma, they're puzzled from being a kohen. They're no longer kohen. Says the Gemara, it sounds from here, kohenes in only dafke if these girls themselves were a bas kohen. But Yisraelis, if they, for example, were the wife of a kohen, but they themselves were Yisraelis, then it seems that everything's all right. Is that true? We know that if a Yiddish woman was married to a kohen, even though she was raped, she cannot go back to a kohen. Even though it was an accident, can't go back to her husband. So what are you saying? The problem is only if she's a kohen. It's a bas kohen. It makes no difference a bas kohen or bas Yisrael. What does matter is if she's married to a kohen and that happened, even though it was a mistake that they swapped the wives around, it's too late. She can't go back to her husband. Yisraelis like, hey, Moshe, right? Read it, not that if she was a bas kohen, read it, im hoyu neshei kohen, if the husband was a kohen. If the husband was a kohen, and this is what happened, even though it was a mistake, they cannot go back to the husband, the apostle of Guder. Says the Gemara, and again, that's not really correct. So you're telling me Dafka Neshei Kohen. The only time this has an impact is if they're the wives of Kohen presently. In Neshei Yisrael, if they were presently the wife of Yisrael, it has no impact. But it's not correct. Because even though true, if the wife of Yisrael was raped or something happened by accident, she can go back to her husband. But if she loses her husband, let's say her husband dies, she becomes a widow, she still cannot marry a Kohen in the future, because once upon a time, she was she was raped while she was married woman. Well, Amar Abamram, Hamil Samar said the following thing: Van Hidu no nine, and he opened her eyes, and Mastisa from a Mishnah which said, "Ashes Yisrael, a Yiddish woman Shenensa, she was raped. So even though she can go back to her husband Yisrael, Afapi Shimutedes Labaila, she's the wife of Yisrael, she can go back to her husband. Nevertheless, in the future, if she becomes a widow and she wants to marry a Kohen, she can't." So what's that Mishnah? Either it says in Mishnah Bas Kohen, that definitely doesn't work. Doesn't matter who she is. If she's married to a Kohen, she can go back, and it doesn't even matter if the husband's a Kohen. As long as any Kohen, she can go back, whether it's a husband's Kohen or not. This is what he means. Let's go back to the original chat. We're talking about girls' kindness, and we're not talking about regarding the relationship with the husband. So if they were married to Yisrael, which that goes back to husband, nevertheless, if the husband dies and they had no children, generally a bas kohen can go back to her family and eat from truma, but not in this case. She cannot go back to the original case, as it was because of this situation. Hadnaloch, arbo achin. Now we start the fourth pelik, which is known as a chaylis liyevemtei. So, if somebody has a sister-in-law in waiting, or a few brothers have a sister-in-law in waiting and no children, they have to either give her yibum or they give her chalitza. That sets her free. Yibum gets married to one of the brothers-in-law, or chalitza, he set her free. And then the tzara as well, all the other co-wives that were married to this brother, the one who's deceased, are now free and they can get married. Now, technically, you're not supposed to give a chalitza until 3 months after the yibum, just after the husband died, just to make sure that there were no children there. And nor should you marry to make sure that there were children, because there's a child. First of all, you're not allowed to marry her anymore, because only if your brother had no children in the midst of Yibum, there was a child. In fact, it's an Isser of Eishes Ach. And so you have to wait 3 months. But if you didn't wait 3 months, the chalitza is still a valid chalitza, as Taisha explains. So this is the situation. You gave chalitza to Yevamos, so Reuven died and Shimon gave, or Shimon Levi were alive. Shimon gave chalitza to Leah, of his wife. The name Tzas were better. It turned out to be afterwards. At the time, they didn't know. So it wasn't done major anything about that. No, it turned out to be that actually she was pregnant, because it takes 3 months before you recognize her pregnancy. And it turned out to be that she was pregnant, which means that they have no right to marry her. So it seemed the chalitza didn't do anything. Now, a chalitza, the Rabbanon treat like a get, which means all the laws of a divorce apply to chalitza, but mid the Rabbanon. First mission in Makis, the Gemara explains. So the Rashi, that explains it there. So this chalitza, for example, if Shimon gives chalitza to Leah, then just like if it's a divorced wife, he's not allowed to live with any of her sisters or anything like that, or her mother or anything like that. So he gave chalitza to Yevamos. It turned out to be the chalitza was for naught, because they had a child. The older she gave birth, the child was an existing child that actually survived 30 days. You have to survive before we can determine the child is a good child. Actually, there are different tests, whether it's an 8-month baby or a 9-month baby, full-blown pregnancy. Anyway, who mutter b'krei he permitted all the relatives, because the chalitza had no bearing here whatsoever. She permitted his relatives. It doesn't disqualify from kuna midrabanan, because she wasn't divorced. She wasn't a chalitza. Why is she free? Because she had a child, or a co-wife had a child, and that's why they are free. What happened? She was pregnant, but it turned out to be the child didn't survive, which means retrospectively there were no children. There's a mitzvah of yibum, so chalitza turned out to be there was a valid chalitza. Then, if it's a valid chalitza, who also b'krei? It sounds like from here, we'll see more later, that nothing else has to be done. She's free. Not that you have to give her another chalitza. It sounds like the chalitza itself was effective, like Rabbi Yechon says later in the Gemara. We'll see. So he is forbidden in her relative because she's the chalutza, and she is also b'krei. And upaslam and akuna, and also paslam kuna, the chalitza was valid. That's the first part of the mission. The second part of the mission is the same scenario, but instead of giving a chalitza, you actually married her. The same two possibilities. Turns out to be she was pregnant. Did the child survive? If the child survives, then he no longer had a right to marry her, because there's no mitzvah yibum. Age is which is terrible consequences, and or not. So he goes, you married your sister-in-law. So Shimon married Leah, Reuben's wife. The mitzvah turned out to be she was pregnant. The yoldom and gave birth. In other words, he had the right to marry her. Age is committed a sin inadvertently. The child existed. He has to divorce her immediately because they're living in sin. The chayavin, the carbon. In fact, they have to bring a carbon because he lived with and married his wife, his brother's wife, when there was no mitzvah whatsoever. And as Taisa said, we're not talking about a case where he waited 3 months and then he married her and then it turned out to be that she was pregnant, because then, it would be like an oinus. What else was he supposed to do? He waited for 3 months and there was no signs of a pregnancy. We're talking about within the 3 months. So therefore, he has to be in carbon. And the co-wife obviously permitted, and she also permitted because it was a child. But she was pregnant, but turned out to be that the child didn't survive, which means that retrospectively she had a mitzvah yibum. Now, you had a mitzvah yibum, and the brother-in-law was meyabim, even though the brother was meyabim, even though for a while she had a term of pregnancy. So there was a time that was come and go. We weren't certain whether it was going to be a mitzvah yibum or not. The din is yekayim. Now there's two ways to learn yekayim. Yekayim can mean is like continue living the way that you are. No, nothing has to be done. In other words, the marriage that he did to her while she was pregnant is a valid marriage. As Rabbi Yochanan says, or yekayim means you have to do something, marry her again, because while she was pregnant, since she didn't know which way it'll go, it was not valid at all. What about Safik ben Tisha L'Rishon, Safik ben Shiva L'Achron? They married within 90 days. Now, we don't know. We cannot tell. We cannot discern whose child is it. Is it Reuben's child or is it Shimon's child? Now, Manoshech, everything's all right. If it's, as far as the child is concerned, if it's Reuben's child, that means there was no mitzvah yibum whatsoever. Fine, the child's 100% kosher. And Shimon didn't have living with the brother's wife. If it turned out to be Shimon's child, which means that there was a mitzvah yibum, then the child's 100% kosher, but it's Shimon's child, and Shimon and did not commit an aved. So Yaitzi, they still have to divorce because we don't know whose child it is. But have lad kosher, the child in the mother shall kosher, but chayavin ba'ashim tali, because we don't know what the situation is. They're chayavin ashim tali, unless it's more than 3 months when he married her. What could he do? Then it's all right. Then you don't bring ashim tali either. Says the Gemara. Itma, we have a fascinating machlekes between Rabbi Yechon and Shlakish. Hachaylit lemu'beres. If somebody gives chalitza to a woman while she's pregnant, the Reuben died left behind a wife, there's no children, but she's a pregnant wife. Now there's a suffix. Will the child survive? Now most children will survive, but still a suffix. You can't guarantee 100%. And the fact is, he gave a chalitza. And then she did miscarry. So the chalitza, do we say retrospectively is a valid chalitza? Or do we say at the time we didn't know, so therefore you can't put in the rules of retrospectivity? And Rabbi Yechon said, yes, we do. No require chalitza from the brothers or even from himself. Others say that he can no longer be involved. It has to be the brothers. So the Shlakish says, you do require chalitza from one of the brothers or maybe himself as well. Why? Because the chalitza he gave at the time of during a term of pregnancy, since we didn't know if it's valid or not, is not valid. The Gemara explains now why. Rabbi Yochanan says, you don't need chalitza from Achi. Why? Chalitza mu'berish more chalitza. It turned out to be a valid chalitza. That's good enough. We'll say the principle of Igloi Muslim Afreya, that is, we'll say that retrospectively everything is good. Ubiyah mu'berish more biyah. And we're going to say that the biyah of a pregnant woman is a valid biyah. So when he had biyah, they had no idea whether they're going to stay married or not. But since it turned out to be retrospectively that she was a yavam because there were no children, it's good. And the Shlokish says, Zicha chalitza. The Shlokish says, you need chalitza minach. Shlokish says, no, that chalitza is not valid. Chalitza muberes, loishmor chalitza. The Shlokish says, chalitza that you gave during the pregnancy because we didn't know 100% that it's a valid chalitza is invalid. Will be muberes, loishmor bia. It's not valid. If you had bia with her at the time, it's not considered, even turned out to be that it's the right thing to do, you have to redo it again. And what's the sweater of the machlekes? So if you want, I can tell you it's based on a pasuk, or if you want, I can tell you Svar it's all based on logic. Even says, look, even today we just don't know. But if Eliyahu would have come over to us and said, that this embryo is going to die, is not going to be carried through the full term. The only problem is that we don't know. But had we known right now that she is not going to have a child that is going to survive, now it would have been a valid chalitza, would have been a valid bia. So therefore, we're going to apply the rule of Igloi Muslim Mafrei. We're going to say that what happened later is good enough for now. Just we don't know. And the Shlokish says, because we don't know, we don't say Igloi Muslim. Taisa explains that this is different than some other cases we say that the event happens later, it reveals it before. Because in this case, we'll say that when do we say Igloi Muslim? You could have found out now, you just didn't. So therefore, whenever you find out, it's as if it happened now. But if in the situation, even if you would explode it right now, there was no way to determine whether the child is going to survive or not. Because there's no way to determine the child will survive or not. So therefore, what happens later does not have any reflection on today. Now, actually, the Achreim talk about how is this argument different than the general argument we have in Shas about Yesh Breira and Breira. Like, an event later, does it have any bearing on the past or not? And especially in light of the fact that Rabbi Yechon is one who holds Ein Breira. He says, he doesn't hold in the principle of Yesh Breira. So if he doesn't believe in Yesh Breira, how come he holds and he goes from Afreya? So the Achreim, Chos and others talk about that. Or I can tell you, it's actually they're arguing on a pasuk. What's the pasuk? Rabbi Yechon hold. It says in the pasuk, when do you have the bits of yibum ben ein loy? We already had this gemara before. If there's no children, the word ein can be written minus the yud, but it's written with the yud. But Rabbi Yechon himself doesn't dash that. All he says is ben ein loy. He never will have a child. Amar Achmana. The fact is he had no child. But it doesn't matter right now. She's pregnant, but she didn't have a child. Didn't turn into a child. So therefore, the mitzvah even the chalitza and the bia is valid. He says, no. Ben ein loy, the yud is extra, which means I love it. There's right now, there's a possibility there might be a child, and you cannot give chalitza, you cannot have yibum. Okay, Rabbi Yechon actually shows a question with the Gemara later on. This will turn around and use it actually as a proof. He asks a question from our very Mishnah here. It says, what happens? It turns out to be ein havlad shel kayama. What happens if it turns out to be that the child is not? It is not. He gave chalitza to Yevamos and turned out to be that she was pregnant, but the child didn't survive. If the child didn't survive, so therefore the chalitza is about chalitza. This who also bekreva this and this is like the what do you call it? This is the second case in the first part of the Mishnah about chalitza where the child actually did not survive. So therefore the chalitza was valid. Who also bekreva? He is also and her relatives. He asur bekreva upasul kuna. So how we're dealing with it? We're treating it as if it was a real chalitza. Because if there was no chalitza at all, because at the time she was pregnant and it turned out she didn't have a child, but the chalitza is not valid, like the Shlaki said, then why do we say that he's forbidden with her relative, she's his, and she's possible disqualified marriage? There's no chalitza here. Obviously, there was a chalitza. She's like a divorcee. Clear proof to Rabbi Yechon that if you gave chalitza to a woman while she was pregnant, even if it turns out to be there was no child, if it turns out to be there was no child, the chalitza is valid. Bishleim says Rabbi Yechon according to me, I mean I say chalitza mubetter shmor chalitza. That's a valid chalitza mishum hachiri for pasla. Because later on we found out we say igloi milsa. We believe in the rule of retrospectivity. Elulidach according to you, chalitza mubetter shmor chalitza. You say the chalitza at the time if she's pregnant. I don't care what turns out later. There's no chalitza. I might pasla makuna. Why is she pasla makuna? Why is he forbidden her relatives and so on? Amalei, he answered simply, midrabbanan uluchum rabalma. You're right. Technically, everything should be, there is no chalitza, something else. But because people don't know the halachas, they see that he gave her chalitza, then they see that that she goes ahead, she's a chalutza, they think, and then she goes ahead. And they don't realize that the reason why she's free is because there was a child there. They just know that she had received a chalitza, so they'll think that a chalutza can marry a kain, and all kinds of consequences can come out which are wrong, and therefore we're machmir. In fact, the shlokish now will turn it around and use it as a proof. Ikidam, the others say, Eisvei the shlokish. On the contrary, the shlokish asked a question from the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, if there was no child, who also the krevisef? Let's go to the first part of the Mishnah. It said if there was no child, he is forbidden. So obviously, if there's no child, there's a mitzvah yibum. Then the chalitza is a valid chalitza, and it says over here, who also bekrevisef? Right? If there was no existing child. He is usher in the krevis and so on. And she, because why? Because we're going to say the chalitza. Where Rabbi Yechon understood it, because the chalitza is valid. Where the Shlach understood it, you have to do chalitza again. But Rabbi Yechon understood the chalitza you gave was valid because it turned out to be no children. So that's the question. According to me. So why do you have to spell out? These are consequences. If what your Mishnah is trying to tell us is that if it turned out to be there was no child, so the chalitza was valid, all the Mishnah had to say was chalitza is valid. And then we know the laws of chalitza, then he's forbidden her relative, she's forbidden his, disqualified makuna. Why does the Mishnah spell out the consequences without spelling out the principle? So Rosh Lakish will use that as a proof of ket. The principle doesn't apply here. The truth of the matter is there was no chalitza. But because the perception out there is that there's a chalitza, therefore the consequences will still be there. On the contrary, there's a proof to me. I mean, I say chalitza muberes lo yishmo chalitza heindik tani pasul nekuna. That's why we talk about consequences. The Chumrah will tell you that even though the chalitza was not a valid chalitza, but we're going to treat it as if it was disqualified kuna and krevis and all that. But like Tani doesn't say ein notzicha chalitza min achin. It doesn't say the principle. She does not require a second chalitza. According to you, that says that it's a valid chalitza. And then what should the Mishnah have said? Ein notzicha chalitza min achin. Should have said you don't require a second chalitza. The Rebbe said, I'm not deterred by that. In Hachinami, you're right. The Mishnah should have said that. But you know why the Mishnah used the words, the consequences? Because in the Reisha talks about that if there was a child, then the chalitza didn't do anything, and she can marry a kohen if the husband dies, and so on and so forth. They use the word like postel lakuna, so therefore the contrast, we use the same wording but the other way around. Like postel lakuna, safer postel. Okay, next question. The second half of the Mishnah is talking about if they did yibum. Not chalitza, but yibum, and she turned out to be pregnant. And there were two scenarios: either there was a child or there wasn't. It says in the second half of the Mishnah, what happens that turned out there was no child? It says in the Mishnah, well, they can stay married because there's a mitzvah yibum yekayim. And Rabbi Yechon is translated what yekayim is that they can remain married. In other words, the bia was a valid bia. You don't have to do bia again. It's bia shleim. I say, I mean, a chalitza was a valid bia. Bia is the good is a good chalitza, good bia. Shemach is only kaim. Does he kaim? You're saying that was not valid. So why does the Mishnah say Yekayim? It should have said Yachzer v'Yibel v'Yekayim. According to you, it should have said, okay, now go ahead and do the bia properly, because the first bia was not valid. My so Rabbi Shlokish counters my Yekayim. It's a strange word. Yekayim means Yachzer v'Yibel v'Yekayim. The Loisagi. No, the Mishnah Yekayim is a verb. Go ahead and do something to make sure that this marriage stays. No, do bila again, because the bila you did before is not valid. Otherwise, you wouldn't use the word yikayim. Ikadam the other say, eight for the Shlokish Rabbi Yechon. The Shlokish asked the Rabbi Yechon, what do you call it? Shlokish Rabbi Yechon, on the contrary, ein avlad shekayom. It says, what happened if there was no child? The child died, so therefore, there's a mitzvah yibum, yikayim. That's what what Yekayim means. Go ahead and do something to make sure that it continues. You have no choice. You have to do this. In other words, you have to go ahead and proactively go ahead and do another bia, because the bia you did while she's better, since you didn't know which way it'll turn, is not a valid bia. And you cannot give a get to her right now, because a get doesn't know anything about yibum. You need to do the proper process, which is yibum or chalitza. And why can't you just give chalitza now? You can't, because once you had a relation with her, that's it. You have to continue along that path. Okay, you hold on what? That the bia was a valid bia. So now that they're continuing to be married, the Mishnah should have said, the Ratz, if he wants Yaiti, he can divorce her, or Ratz, Yikayim, he wants, he can live with her. It's up to him. Yikayim means you have no ultimatum, you have no other option. You must go ahead and continue, which means go ahead and do another bia. So Rabbi Yechon again, just the syntax of the Mishnah. Enoch and Ami, right? He could have said that, but I needed to turn the ratio, because in the first case where there was a child, after to turn out pregnant, there was a child, which means the bia didn't do anything. There it's Yaitzi, he must divorce her. There's no other option. Turn out for Yikayim. So he draws a contrast. In this case, Yikayim live with her. But it's not giving you exploring all the options. Says about Meisrei. I'll ask you another question on Rabbi Yechon. Meisrei, we learn. It says, if somebody marries his sister-in-law, then it turned out to be that she was pregnant. Turns out to be pregnant. You shouldn't marry her. It says, in other words, if you married, let's say the Shimon married, the Reuven was married to two women, Leah and Sarah, and then he died, and Shimon goes ahead and marries Leah. It turned out to be that Leah was pregnant, so right now we don't know. Leah married to Shimon, not married to Shimon. Is there a mitzvah yibum, not a mitzvah yibum? What's going to happen? So late to Nasa Tzarasa, nobody can marry the co-wife either, because we don't know. What don't we know? We don't know whether there's going to be a child, and therefore she's a free woman, or whether there won't be a child, and therefore there's a mitzvah yibum. We have to make sure there's yibum. And the Braisa says, Shema Yehev Vlad Ben Kayomim. There might be an existing child. Now the Chayda, that's grounds why she should be able to get married. If there's an existing child, it means that there's no mitzvah yibum. She's a free woman. So the Braisa should have said that maybe there is no child, so therefore there's a mitzvah yibum. She has to hang around and wait to see what happens. So, and yet the Braisa says, well, first let's understand the Braisa. On the contrary, you're telling me we're worried that maybe there's an existing child. On the contrary, the existing child, she's exempt, she doesn't need a mitzvah. She can marry anybody she wants. But we have to reword the Braisa and say, as if to say, Shema lo yehev la ben kayama. Maybe maybe the child won't survive. Now, what happened was Levi married the wife of Reuben. According to Rabbi Yechon, Levi married the wife of Reuben. It's a good bia. So let's say if the child doesn't survive, the bia is a good bia. So she's a free woman. So why can't she get married? Why is the Braisa say she can't get married? Why can't you get married? She's able to get married. If the child turned out to be a surviving child, so there's no mitzvah even, she can allow to marry somebody else. And if the child turned out to be that it's not a surviving child, comes out that Shimon married Reuben's wife anyway, so she's a free woman. So she's free. Why do we say we put the clamps on her and we say she can't get married? She has to wait. Wait for what? Isn't that a proof to me that the bia that Shimon did with Leah is not a valid bia, and therefore the tzara cannot get remarried? Amar Abai said that's such a strong question. Maybe I'm going to modify Rabbi Yechon's view, and I'm going to say the bia kuli amalek pligi that Rabbi Yechon admits if he had bia with her while she's pregnant, because we didn't know whether there's a mitzvah or not. Rabbi Yechon is made that this is not a allowed bia. This doesn't work. It doesn't exempt. The whole purpose is lahak shem lach. We don't know if you're going to be doing that. If by bia, the whole purpose is lahak shem lach. We don't know if it'll be lahak shem lach because maybe there's already a child. So the bia is not a valid bia. And then Yechon will agree to the shlokish that the bia while she's muberes is not a valid bia. Keep pleading. What are they arguing? Bechalitza. They're arguing in the case of chalitza. Rabbi Yechon holds chalitza muberes more chalitza. Rabbi Yechon holds that chalitza muberes is called chalitza bia. Muberes leshma bia. Rabbi Yechon agrees that bia is not valid. It's only the chalitza we're worried about. And the shlokish of bia muberes leshma bia. The chalitza muberes leshma chalitza. They're only arguing about chalitza. But everyone agrees bia is not a valid bia, and therefore we tell the co-wife you have to hang around and wait because it turns out bia was not a valid bia. There's a mitzvah ibum. You have to wait. Doesn't make sense. If we know the chalitza is dependent on bia, if bia works, then chalitza works. And if bia if you can tell me that bia doesn't work, then chalitza doesn't work, and Rabbi Shlokish is right. How in the world can Rabbi Yechon come along and say that even though bia doesn't work, but chalitza does work? Then why is that? Because we have a rule. We have a rule. Whoever can be miyabim has the mitzvah of chalitza. Because the Torah says, if he doesn't want to marry her, then you do chalitza. That means he has a choice of marrying her. But even if he has no choice of marrying her, during the pregnancy period, he can't marry her, then ain't no chalitza. That period, he can't give chalitza. Elamarabba says, Rabbi, I'll tell you how pshat in the Braisa is. Hachikama, this I learned the Braisa. Hakoinis Yevamta, he married Yevama, Venitza, about to be pregnant. Harezulik, she cannot get married. She's in limbo. Why? The way we originally said, Shema Yehavlad Ben Kayama. Maybe the child's a Ben Kayama. No, if the child's a Ben Kayama, then what's the problem? She's a free woman. That's not so simple. Ubi Maberes Loishma Bia, the Chamitza, Maberes Loishma Chalitza. And like Rishlaki says, neither one Bia or Chalitza doesn't work. No, if neither bia nor chalitza doesn't work, if neither one works, and what are you worried about? That maybe it will be a child, existing child. So what if it's an existing child that she's potter? What's the problem? Then there's no mitzvah even at all. But why doesn't the bia and the chalitza work? Because she can have a child. But Vlad, the problem is, since she's going to have a child, the Vlad ain't a poiter. The child is not exempt until the child is physically born. The fact that she's pregnant is not good enough. The co-wife cannot go out and get married yet, because even though we know for sure there's a child, because most women have children, the problem is that the child is not pater until the child is born. Until the child is actually born. Otherwise, not called a ben. Ben ain't like, but the ben is only when it's born. Tanya was already talking about the price like Robert if somebody marries Yevamah, but it's not the daughter turn out be pregnant, you shouldn't marry the co-wife Shema. It says clearly because the child might survive. The child might survive, she's a free woman, yes, but she's not free until the child is physically born. It's not, in this case, it's not the bin will do anything, it's a Vlad. It's only when the child comes into the world. So now on the contrary, now we have a question of shlokish. The only reason why we say you have to wait around is because we need the child to be born. It's only because the only reason what's holding her back is because maybe there will be a child and the child has to be born. Sounds like if it wouldn't have been the child, she's taka free because the woman received chalitza bia. But if shlokish holds a bia muber, doesn't work. It wouldn't be a child, so she'd be exempt. On the contrary, lema to have it to you to the shlokish, the kasha the shlokish. It seems to me that the only problem is why she's in a state of limbo is because maybe there is because it's probably a child, and you have to wait till the child is born. But if it probably is not a child, then she's a free woman. Why? You still have to wait till the end of the 9 months because according to shlokish, the bia of a bebedes is ineffective. You read the Braisa wrong. I'll tell you how to read the Braisa. If you marry your sister-in-law and you will better pregnant, that the co-wife can get married. Maybe there won't be a child. And if there's no child, the bia right now did nothing. The chalitza right now did nothing. The chalitza nothing happened. Therefore, she's stuck. She has to wait until she's no longer pregnant. The woman is no longer pregnant to receive her chalitza bia. So she's stuck. So why do we mention over here about the child being born? It's like a question now. But why are we even suspecting that maybe there won't be a child? Let's follow the majority of women that are pregnant, they will have a child, there will be a children. So for that, the B'rai says, Vlad ain't pointed at it's not going to help us because of Vlad, we have to wait till it's actually born. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow. Everyone have a good day.